on the Perception and Action podcast. What the beep is an uncontrolled manifold analysis? Bringing back Andrew Wilson to discuss another difficult topic within an ecological approach, the uncontrolled manifold. What exactly is good and bad variability? So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Now on to the show. So today, it's my pleasure to be joined by, again, one of my favorite guests, Andrew Wilson, too. I always bring him on to talk about really hard concepts in ecological psychology that I have trouble explaining on my own. That's like we did with memory, I think was our last one. I'm sure we'll come up with other ones. But today we want to talk about the idea, concept of the uncontrolled manifold and the uncontrolled manifold analysis, which I think a lot of people have heard of, but probably don't understand on a very deep level. So Andrew has a paper, a preprint, right? That's out now where you applied this to throwing, which we'll get into. But I thought we could start with kind of a general overview of what it is, and we're just going to kind of freeform it like we like to. So, and I don't have to introduce you, everyone. So can you, what's the elevator pitch of the uncontrolled manifold, maybe to start with? Yeah.
So it's a mathematical model for your data is the first thing, but it's it's an interesting mathematical model because it comes from a very particular understanding of how movement works that will be very familiar to anybody ecologically minded. So the basic principle is it starts from an understanding of movement where we have more degrees of freedom than we ever need in order to be able to solve any given task, right? I can do more things with my body than I ever need to do at any given instant. And that's just a fact of the human movement system. And it's a good fact because it provides what we talk about it as redundancy. It just means that A, you can do lots of different things, and B, even if you're trying to do the same thing, you can do it in a bunch of different ways. And that gives you flexibility to cope with fatigue, an obstacle, etc. Right? So the idea, this is Latash's wonderful bliss of motor abundance, right? It's not a degrees of freedom problem. It's an amazing thing. It's fabulous, and it enables us to remain really tuned into our environment. But the thing that the uncontrolled manifold recognizes is that if you have more than one way of doing something, and you're trying to do something, then you have to pick. Something has to make you do one thing out of all the possible things that you could possibly do. And so the question is, well, what is the thing? Why do you do that one thing out of all the possible things you could have done? And the uncontrolled manifold is a way of testing hypotheses and ideas about that. So what you do is you look at someone trying to do the same thing over and over again, right? So you give people a task. And in my case, for this paper, it was throw a tennis ball to hit a target at one of three distances. So I'm looking at, say, 20 throws to try and hit a target at 5 meters away or 10 meters away. And because of redundancy, even if they do it, if they crack on and do 20 throws and hit it every single time, they'll never do it exactly the same way twice. That's Bernstein's wonderful repetition without repetition, right? So it's just a fact. Even when you do the same thing, you'll never do it the same way twice because you've got this room to maneuver, right? So there's variability. And so the uncontrolled manifold idea is a way of asking the question, okay, well, there is variability, but you're still hitting the target. So some of that variability must be a problem, and some of it must not be a problem. It must be okay that there's that variability, right? And that's the central understanding, is that some variability simply doesn't matter for achieving the goal of the task, and that the system is quite happy to vary in those ways because it doesn't take you away from achieving the goal. But obviously you could have some variability that makes you miss the target, and that's a problem. So you need to clamp that down. So all of this is just an understanding of how movements work that should be very familiar to ecological types, right? We've got these redundant movement systems that can move in lots of different ways and have room to cope and maneuver even when you're trying to do the same thing over and over again. And clearly something is constraining the system to basically be doing one thing rather than another thing, right? And it's the UCM is a way of testing theories about this. So what you do is you measure the variability of performance, right? So I had people I needed 20 good throws, 20 throws in which they successfully hit the target at each distance. And so they do that. And so for each distance, they're doing basically the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. So you take that movement variability, and we're looking at not just the outcome of the throw, but the execution. So we're looking at joint angles. We're looking at how the movement unfolded over time. You look at the variability in that, and then you look at that variability and with respect to some potential things that could be constraining it. And this is where you get to test your hypothesis. So you might think that the performance variability is being constrained by trying to produce a particular velocity, or you're trying to produce a smooth trajectory, or trying to produce something else, right? So what you do is you take what you think the system is trying to achieve and have a look to see whether or not that explains why the variability is the way it is in successful throws. And in theory, it lets you test various hypotheses about the control system.
Yeah, no, I think, that's good. And I'll just kind of add, going back, like the degrees of freedom, right? And we'll stick with throwing. I was just doing I think Turvey and there's, it just in the upper body, there's 26 degrees of freedom in throwing.
Yeah.
If you all the muscles in your elbow and shoulder, right? Never mind the lower body. But so the traditional theory of like motor programming is that you have to control. I'm trying to get where the terms come from.
Yeah, sure.
You have to control. You have to specify what each one of those things is doing.
Yes.
The uncontrolled idea is that some of those we don't need to. We can just let them. And not only does that make the problem easier, but it might, like you said, it's potentially beneficial because the fact that these things can vary allows us to adapt more to changing. Mm-hmm. That's where the uncontrolled, some of the degrees of freedom do not need to be actively controlled by the system, right? Yeah. Which is very different, premise to traditional theories of motor.
That's it. And there's one final piece then is that one of the ways in which that happens is in the form of what we call a synergy. And basically that's the idea where you take a couple of these degrees of freedom and you make them work as a team. Mm-hmm. So I was explaining this to my students the other day talking about Lego bricks, right? So if you've got a handful of individual Lego bricks, each one of those is free to move in any kind of direction. So if you're trying to carry them across the room, that's quite a hard thing to do. But an easy solution is just to build something out of them and then carry that one piece, right? So crudely, what you're doing is you're taking your degrees of freedom, putting them together into a particular organization, and then working with that piece. And it just, the pieces are a little bit more fluid and flexible than Lego, but the basic idea is that, and it's about making the control problem solvable, because you do have to, you've got a degree of freedom, if you've got something that can change its state, it has to be told what to do by something. And so if it's the nervous system, then we're in trouble. But if it's being told what to do by its friends and the synergy, that offloads some of the work to the synergy, right? And it makes it so that it's working it's working in a functional way. And so obviously the trick is you have to learn to build the right synergy, and you have to learn to put these things together, because you can have the wrong one, etc. But that's the goal of learning now. But that's the idea. That's the last of the piece lurking in there, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about this. I think in an interesting parallel, it's kind of to information on the Gibson. It's like a higher order control. Right.
It's exactly analogous to a higher order information variable. That's like it's the action version of an information variable.
Instead of trying to control each thing, you're just. I think Turvey calls it an equation of constraint. You're giving this rule that multiple degrees of freedom have to follow, but as long as they follow it, they can do whatever the hell they want.
That's exactly it. And it solves the problem. We talk about these higher order information variables because those are the things that remain invariant and stable and detectable in exactly the same way a synergy is the kind of thing that's useful because it's not flailing around and it's not all over the place. It's being quite actively constrained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just at a different level and a different different way. Yeah.
And basically, the uncontrolled manifold is just asking, okay, you put into it what you think the synergy is,
Mm-hmm.
you put into it what you think the synergy is trying to achieve, and you look to see whether or not that fits or not, whether or not you can explain using those two pieces why the variability is the way that it is. And sometimes, and if you get the wrong one, then it won't work, right? And the idea is that if you end up with, a good explanation of why the variability is the way that it is, that's evidence in favor of that. Yes, you've identified the synergy right, and you've also identified the thing it's trying to do correctly. So it's quite nice. Like it's a really direct test of the question that you want the answer to, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. And the manifold term, to me, I think of that this solution space. Like it's a volume of potential solutions. And
it's a subspace. So again, it's thinking about, out of all the things you can possibly do, only some of them are any good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So out of all the possible throws I can produce, only some of them will produce a throw that hits that target. And the ones that live in the region that produce a hit, that's kind of that. Like for me, and actually, what I'm trying to connect up to some previous work where I've explicitly tried to model that. That's the manifold. That's the bit that's the subspace. That's the bit that lives within all the space of all the possible things that you can do that you're trying to achieve. And now the question is, how can you get that into a person? It's easy to get it into the maths. Mm-hmm. Now the question is how to get it into a person, and that's the affordances connection.
Yeah. So, people have done this. You're right on the actual physics level. Like I think with throwing, like you just go back to projectile motion, right? There's only a certain combination of release angles and velocities that will get the ball to whatever target you define, right? So that defines, like, that's this manifold of, in this case, that's release parameters, right? Not the key question is how you get there from the movement parameters, right? But that defines kind of the space of possible outcomes. You're right; it is a subset, right?
Yeah, that's kind of, it's just a subset. That's literally the way I think about it.
Like,
just
I could throw a baseball by just snapping my wrist and not using any other movements. But that's not within the manifold for throwing 90 miles an hour, right? Exactly. There's no possible way I can produce that outcome with that solution, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
and that's the final.
Yeah. So I think, and it starts with kind of Bernstein's fundamental, variability is functional.
Mm-hmm.
How do we understand? And I think there's a lot of issue we go on the practical side. Coaches want to know, okay, if I buy that, what variability is good and what's not, right? And this is a principled way both to understand that and conceptually and actually test it, right, in data.
Yes. Yeah, and whether or not this, like, it's always a little bit hard to draw that direct line to out on the field on exactly how to feed into this. But in a big sense, what UCM is good for is that it's a good tool for building the evidence base that yes, this is in fact how movements are organized. So this is if you're gonna try and teach a skill, this is what you have to front up to. You have to front up to the idea that there's actually no perfect solution, that there's lots of wiggle room, but that wiggle room is constrained in meaningful ways. So not everything is good, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where you then start to have to thinking about training. You have to think about where you're trying to get someone to, how to constrain them in that direction without locking it down too much and getting it too restrictive so that they don't get to explore the whole space a bit.
Yeah. So in uncontrolled manifold analysis, you have some movement parameters, the best word, that you're mapping on to some performance outcome. Right?
Yes.
So can you give us in your throwing example, can you give us like what those are?
Yeah. So we actually ended up doing, so part of the point of the paper is that we're actually testing a bunch of different things to try and see how it goes. So what we did, the basic set of movement, the movement data that we took was joint angles of the shoulder, elbow, wrist system, right? So we did that for a couple of reasons. One is that There's only a few other papers that have done UCM on throwing, and they've almost all just looked at that performance bit. A lot of the execution of throwing, obviously there's things that come before and a little bit after the throw, but a lot of the actual, a lot of what makes throwing interesting and a throw rather than something else does just happen in the upper arm. So there are, at some point I'd like to go looking at a more full body thing, but that's more complicated. Yeah. So we restricted ourselves down to something manageable. And so that's the movement that we're trying to understand. And that system has, each of those joints has 3 degrees. Well, the shoulder has 3 degrees of freedom. It can move and rotate and all that sort of stuff. The elbow has 1, so it can obviously just bends in one direction. And then the wrist can move in 3 dimensions. And so you end up with a 7 degree of freedom system. And that's more than the 1 degree of freedom that you're trying to produce, a release velocity or a release angle or a particular hand position or something. And so it's a redundant system. That means there's possibility for it to produce the same outcome in different ways. Right. And once you've got that, then you're off to the races. So this particular paper, that's what we did. We looked at the variability in the shoulder, elbow, wrist synergy while that's operating while a throw is happening. And then we looked at the variability with that and decomposed it with respect to a bunch of potential things that could potentially be what's driving it. So we looked at, and we ended up splitting it out in part based on what people had previously done. And then also I wanted to be able to look at that and compare how that went compared to some decomposing the variance with respect to a formal affordance analysis that I'd done in an earlier paper. And I wanted to see whether or not variables that came out of that affordance analysis were doing anything in terms of explaining what was going on. And so I needed to be able to do a compare and contrast. So one of the things, for example, that we looked at was the position of the hand defined just in an external frame of reference relative to the lab, right? And so the idea is the variability of the throw being organized so as to stabilize the performance of the hand so that it produces a nice smooth trajectory through space, for example? That's one question that we asked. And we looked at the speed of the hand, and we looked at the orientation of the hand. And so we looked at a bunch of different things, and we looked at each one. And again, remember, the idea is that some of these will show signs of being the thing that the variability is trying to stabilize, right? That it's trying to preserve in amongst. So the idea is that if there's variability happening, but if this other thing is behaving itself in the face of all that variability, then maybe the system's trying to maintain that, and it's allowing variability that doesn't interfere with producing that. That's the uncontrolled bit. So we looked at a bunch of different things in the paper, and they worked to varying. Each of them worked to varying degrees, and basically, but the goal was to see if we could use affordances to constrain that choice a little bit.
And so, and this is kind of this we talked about it before, and I think there's kind of a messiness in a lot of researcher degrees of freedom in this because, right, you need some sort, so you have the shoulder, elbow, and wrist angle and things. Yep. You somehow need to map that onto your performance variable with some sort of model. Usually there's some, would you call it a feed forward biomechanical model kind of, or not really, I guess?
Well, no, it's not really, because it does imply uncontrolled manifold analysis does kind of imply that there's a feedback loop,
right? Yeah,
that you're trying to do, that you're working to maintain something rather than simply just trying to produce something.
But so I guess I say that because you're trying to this combination of the 3 angles is going to produce this hand trajectory. It's kind of, you have to have a formal model relating those two in the analysis, right?
Yes,
you have to be able to get from one to the other. Yeah.
That's the better way of doing it, right? Is to actually not just say that you're going to measure a few angles that you were able to get some numbers out of easily, but another way that people do is that they will actually put a proper biomechanical model of a person doing the throw, and that can go into it as well, for sure.
Yeah, yours is more, but the alternative that I think most people do is you just look at the relationships, right? Yeah. When the shoulder angle varies, what does the hand do? When the elbow, and kind of
But this is one of the things I discovered.
Yeah.
So while I was working on the paper and writing it and doing the literature, reading, getting tooled up on the analysis, one of the things I realized is actually that the whole thing is wildly under constraint from a research perspective. So which movement variables you choose to look at.
Yeah.
At the moment, there's kind of there's no rule. There's just rules of thumb. So for example, we chose to look at the shoulder, wrist, elbow system because it was convenient and reasonably sensible.
Mm-hmm.
But some other people included the fingers because obviously you're controlling the ball right up until you let go, and there's lots of evidence to suggest you can do last second things with your fingers. Obviously, the arm's not just floating through space, so there was a big chunk of movement that happened because you have to build and develop force from your feet off the ground through your torso up and et cetera, et cetera. So people basically just go, well, we analyze this. And one of the funny things in the papers is that very few people never really say why, other than, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that this is where all the action is. That's kind of about as much as the justification ever goes. And it's not crazy, right? Looking at that particular arm, like that's where a big part of the action for throwing is. Of course it is. So that's interesting that this is the power of the uncontrolled manifold system, is that you can put whatever you think is relevant into it and look to see how it performs relative to whatever else you think is important to the control of this movement. And that's great. That makes this a really powerful tool. But the uncontrolled manifold test itself doesn't tell you what to put in and what not to put in. Right. You have to, and this gets back to an old thing I've been saying for a million years. It's like dynamical systems theory. Dynamical systems theory is a wonderful toolkit, but it's not a theory of behavior, and it doesn't tell you what to do, right? So once you know what you're doing and what you're measuring, dynamics is a great toolbox to throw at this. The thing I've discovered is that UCM is exactly the same. It's a fabulous toolbox. It's inspired and developed from a good understanding of what movement is, and it's very powerful, but it needs constraining down by data, right? And at this point, again, like I'm just in this paper, I'm taking a first swing at trying to constrain the performance variable end by using the perception of affordances as a reason to put some things into rather than others. But the thing that I discovered is that actually this is really going to force me to start thinking properly about effectivities and all of that, which is quite nice. So
yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think I think assumption some people have is this analysis is going to spit out the recipe for effective throwing. You throw effectively by rotating, getting good sternal shoulder rotation, whatever. Right? If you assume from the start that's the way they're throwing, then yes, it tells you how much of. But that's a big assumption. You're assuming at the start what the variables they're trying to control essentially are, right?
Yeah. And what we need is what we need
theory
to bring together lots of theory. Right? This is it. I'll just bang on this. Got to have a good theory of it. And obviously, this because throwing is such a thing that humans do, and that because we do it so much for fun and profit, right? Like biomechanists have been studying throwing for a million years now. So we know a lot of the important things that go on the effectivity side of it, actually. So the thing is, there is plenty of information there, but it's funny that it's almost not showing up in the UCM literature yet. Like it is sort of, even I did it. I went and read a couple of papers about the biomechanics of throwing and kind of nodded to them, but in this paper, I haven't had a chance to really fully connect up with it. That's the next step but it was kind of revealed to me as I was working on this that it's something that we really need. But it's there, like the pieces are there. This is attempting to bring it all together and learning what the uncontrolled manifold can do and what it needs in order to be able to do it as usefully as possible. And it needs a lot. It needs theory. It needs an understanding of effectivities, and it needs, I'm pretty sure, an understanding of performances. But
when yours, I forget, in yours, were you looking at changes with training or across skill level, or just
no? So
you were looking at different distances, right?
So basically, so Jeff Bingham and Arthur Zhu and I had done a paper in 2016 where we looked at variation in the release parameters and mapped that onto the solution manifolds that we had generated, that we were at that point starting to refer to as a formal description of the affordance of the target to be hit. And so what I'm trying, so we're building on that. And basically what we found, so what we did there was we manipulated some things about the target that we thought would manipulate things, or that would affect things about the throw. So we manipulated the distance and we manipulated the height of the target. And we got people who knew how to throw. Some of them were played baseball, college baseball. Some of them were college softballers, and I had some cricketers over here in Leeds. And if anybody ever tells you girls can't throw, the female college softballers blew the male cricketers out of the water, by the way. Anyway.
Yeah. I've seen that here too. I saw the other day. Yeah. Don't believe that at all. Yeah.
But basically what we found was that this is quite nice. So we're able to show that basically as you change the distance of the target, obviously these skilled throwers like to throw fast and flat, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to throw a rope. And so what they do is they bring the release velocity up, they throw faster as the distance goes up, and they bring their angle up to offset the distance. And that was just showing was that what we were doing was making a difference to their behavior. Mm-hmm. And they weren't just trying to produce a single fast throw that would definitely work. I mean, they could have, because it's a vertical target. You could just slam things into this at 40 meters a second if you wanted to, but they don't. They throw in a way that suits the task demands of the particular distance in the particular location. They're very exquisitely tuned in. Mm-hmm. And so they're producing throws that are very adaptive, and they're tweaking that. So that's nice. And so now the UCM analysis lets us kind of push that question back a little bit further, and we're trying to see whether or not just the release parameters, not just the outcome of the movement, but is the execution of the movement also reflecting that subtle, sensitive variation in response to this task demand. And so the thing that we varied was distance, because that's the thing. If you change the distance, both release angle and release velocity change and scale. If you just change the height, people just throw a steeper throw. So basically, we just went for the manipulation that has the biggest effect on throwing output, and then had a look to see how that changed over time, how that changed, how the execution of those throws varied, and then we mapped that onto this formal description of the task affordances. And one of the weird things that came out, obviously people are throwing really nice attuned throws, but it kind of looks like throwing to 10 meters is easier than throwing to 5 meters, mm-hmm. for example, so the ordering in which these things came out was a little different. So like when you know how to throw a ball, it's actually a little tricky to throw it close. Mm-hmm. It turns out, so for example, immediately we could start to see what people were doing in response to the task.
Yeah. No, I think I'll have to talk to you about this later, but I see this, there's actually a drill baseball pitchers do long toss. They throw from progressively different distances. Yeah. And I see the same thing. They literally, like elite thrower could use the same throw for almost out to 200 feet away, but they don't. They seem to have efficiency as some part of the constraint too. Yeah.
Well, I would argue it's not just efficiency, right? What they're doing is that the affordances are changing.
Yeah.
And they're responding to those affordances. And that's the other thing, that there's an element of efficiency, and that obviously throwing at high velocity is hard. It's effortful.
Yeah.
Risks injury if you're really cranking it up. So obviously, and especially the distances we're talking about, we're talking 5, 10, 15 meters here. Yeah. That's long distance for a lab study, right? Yeah. But it's well within their capabilities, of what they're actually able to do. So they're able to move around quite happily without having any real so they do, and it's kind of amazing, really. Like at one level, I'm not surprised, but it's actually kind of really amazing just to see how tuned in to the specifics of the specific target location that they are every single time. And again, this just gets back to the point that they're not just throwing, they're executing a specific perception action loop every single time. Yeah. And they're generating that perception action loop on the fly effectively every single time, which is quite nice. It's just kind of amazing to see it.
Yeah. And so the analysis kind of, I think it falls, there's kind of 3 basic variables, right, that come out of it. I'll do a really simple. So as you're changing the distance and making more and more throws, your wrist angle is going to vary, right? Sometimes that wrist angle varies and it makes you miss the target, right? And you can do this with all the variables, right? Yeah. And that's we is orthogonal variability, right? Variability away
Yes.
from your goal, bad
Yes.
variability. Other variations are what are actually allowing you to throw at different distances or hit the same distances when you get tired.
Yes.
And so that's what we call good variability along the manifold, right? It's kind of the two of the basic things you pull out.
Yeah. And so the thing that I'm trying to do, and this is why like this paper is quite ambitious for me in that it's bringing together a lot of different threads. And that's why it's an early days kind of paper in a first swing. But the ambitious bit is the paper that Jeff and Afra and I did previously in 2016 was we actually identified which release parameters worked and which ones don't for every single target combination. Like, so one of the nice things about throwing is because humans have been throwing stuff and trying to hit people with projectiles for hundreds of years, the physics has been worked out for a long time, right? You need to know how to aim your cannon. So somebody worked it out. So that means it's easy to simulate a projectile motion. And so we literally did that in that paper. And so basically for a given target, we had a target of a given size and a tennis ball with certain parameters. So that was all fixed. And then we just ran the simulation through all possible combinations of release parameters just to see. And then you code it up as it either missed or it hit the target. And if it hit the target, it hit at some distance from the center, basically. So if it drills right down the center, you've got 0 error. And then because the target's 4 foot by 4 foot, obviously you can miss the center by up to 2 feet and still hit the target. And then you're off, then you've missed the thing. So the thing that came out of that paper, we ended up with these graphs, right, of what I'm calling the affordance, what Sternad, for example, refers to as the solution manifold. This is the subspace. This is the bit of the space of all the possible things that you can do that will let you hit the target. And it had a very particular shape for a vertical target. That was the thing that came out. So it wasn't just any old set of release parameters. What we got was these U-shaped patterns. And the U was one of the arms of the U was much thicker than the other one. And so broadly speaking, what that meant was this was on a plot of release angle along the x-axis and release velocity on the y-axis. So what that meant was there was a region of the space where if you could throw the same release angle and a whole range of release velocities and you'd still hit the target. And then there was another region of the space where you could throw the same release velocity and a reasonably large number of, you've got plenty of wiggle room in the release angle and you'd still hit the target, but only in a certain part of the space. There were other parts of the space where that wiggle room didn't exist, and there were other parts of that space where the wiggle room was there, but it was smaller or larger or whatever. So like there was a very particular pattern. And that's what we showed in the 2016 paper was that the variability in the release outcomes tracked the variability and tracked that very particular shape, right? That connects up. I have to go back at some point and do tolerance noise covariation, TNC analysis on this data to connect it all up properly. But I have to do that later. So the moral of the story there is that that manifold, that uncontrolled manifold, that space of release parameters where it's okay if you mess it up a little bit, where you've got some room, where you can have some variability and not change the outcome. That manifold has a very particular shape, and human behavior shows all kinds of signs of being organized with respect to that very particular shape in the space of possibilities. And that's again what we're trying to show with the movement now. We're trying to see whether or not the execution variability also shows signs of being organized with respect to that very particular manifold. And that's the power of the analysis, right? It's a very strong test of a hypothesis, of a very particular hypothesis.
Yeah, no, that's really good stuff. I know I think I've covered in the podcast before. This similar thing's been shown in basketball shooting too.
Yes.
The elite performer, better shooters don't get rid of all the variability in the shot velocity. It's better aligned with the manifold, so they have better error tolerance. Right?
That's exactly it. The experts live in they choose to live in a space where there's tolerance for error, where that variability that they cannot escape. That variability is a fact of trying to do something, but expertise is about learning to live in the region of the space where if you mess it up a little bit, it actually doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's the becoming skillful is not about eliminating variability. It's restructuring it.
Yes,
right? It's accepting that it exists and restructuring it in a way that optimizes for the outcomes, right?
Yeah, and that's the uncontrolled good versus bad variability idea, right?
Yeah.
Good variability is variability that you've structured your variability so that it lives in a region of the space where it's okay, and it doesn't screw with the outcome. And you've structured out all the variability that caused you trouble. And that's what the whole point of the uncontrolled manifold is to try and mathematically show that you've organized your variability in that way with respect to a candidate reason to do it that way.
Yeah.
And then it'll either work or it won't, depending on if you've picked the right thing.
Yeah. And I really like what you're doing here with connecting it with the affordance, and because that, one of the, you air quoted for people listening, good, right? It really should be called potentially good variability, right? I don't think there's any studies that have really shown that this variation along the manifold actually has a purpose. Like, they don't pre-fatigue people and show they, you know what I mean? It's an assumption that being able to go this other place in the manifold is going to be useful at some future constraint, right? Yeah.
Well, that's it. It's more not bad variability.
Yes, that's
rather than good, I think.
Yeah.
Although there is potential for it to be good if it's moving you into a region of the space where there's lots of tolerance. But you're right. That's a separate question. That's interesting.
And like the basketball example, I always, the fact that you can still hit the basket with a very high release angle, which is moving along the manifold, is potentially good when there's someone with their hand in your face, right? When you're shooting. That's so it makes sense, right? We just don't actually demonstrate that, in the actual the data.
And that's
which I think you're trying to kind of connect these two things. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Basically, this gets back to what we were saying earlier, that the uncontrolled manifold method is a wonderful method, but it needs a theory in order to be applied to. We need somewhere to be generating the hypotheses that we're testing with this method. And that's, for me, so this is the other thing, right? So there's the uncontrolled manifold is one of lots of different kinds of ways of formalizing this repetition without repetition idea. So there's lots of them. There's goal covariate something, or goal equivalent manifolds, and TNC, and there's a whole bunch of them. And they're all coming from basically the same place. And this is the thing I worked through in the paper, where I was just trying to identify what they all had in common. And the thing they all have in common is that they all say that the variability is being organized with respect to a task goal of some kind, right? And that's up to you to characterize the task goal. The idea is that, and that's ecologically, that has to be what's constraining you, because nothing else can successfully constrain you, right? Like, you can't, the thing that makes something a good movement is determined by whether or not it's a good fit to the task demands. That's it. That's the only way in which you can evaluate whether or not the movement was any good. Basically, if it's stupid but it works, then it wasn't stupid, right? And so ecologically, what's a task demand? It's an affordance, right? And so there's a natural conceptual fit there for me, that you're organizing your variability with respect to a perceived affordance. That's the task goal you should be trying to organize yourself with respect to. And so now the question is how to formalize the notion of an affordance such that you can get it into the UCM analysis. That's what we've tried to do here. And then look to see whether it helped. And the answer was yes. It's not brilliant yet. I don't think I've nailed this yet. I think the idea is good. I think this paper is worth getting out there because it's working through the logic of the analysis and taking a good swing at it. There's still a lot to go, I think. But that's the basic idea, is that all of these methods think that task demands are what constrains movement variability. And for an ecological psychologist, a task demand is a perceived affordance. That's all. That's what it is. Yeah. And so the nice thing about it for me is that it's forcing me to up my affordance game. It's forcing me to really try and be very specific about what the hell I think an affordance is, and it's forcing me to be precise and as formal as I can. I'm finding that discipline again, I think, That's the other side of this. I want affordances. I think affordances are the best way to constrain and inform an uncontrolled manifold analysis. But I also think the discipline and the logic of using UCM is hopefully, I think one of the things is that it will force us ecological psychologists to be a bit more careful about what we say counts as an affordance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, this is where kind of some of the practical, if on the field, just what you said, we self-organize with respect to a clear affordance and testament. So you have to have those. You can't just throwing without, are you throwing hard? Are you throwing accurately? Are you throwing moving target? Without that, the system's not going to self-organize in the same way, right? Or have the same pressures to self-organize.
Think about just changing the distance.
Yeah.
These skilled throwers self-organized slightly different solutions, right? So depending on what solution you want them, what part of the solution space you want them living in, exactly what distance throwing turns out it's going to matter, right? So that's it, right? It's not just, exactly. You have to have that understanding,
And then the other, exactly. Reason number 1,000,001 why you want variability of practice, right? That drives the movement along the manifold and the synergy demands, right? I got a new constraint. I got to throw further, right? That's what's going to push people into figuring this, restructuring that variability like we talked about. Yeah.
And this is another piece from the 2016 paper where we did a bunch of work with the vertical target, but then we also ran an experiment where we had a horizontal target, so it was lying on its side at 5, 10, or 15 meters. And so at that point, so when you run the simulations to try and see what hits, the shape of the manifold changes. You're still in the same space, but the manifold changes shape, and it becomes a much harder task. And the stable solution now is no longer to throw fast and flat, but you have to do the other option, which is to throw a loopy high and slow throw in order to try and plonk it onto the target. And the thing that happened in that experiment was that my cricketers, were easily able to slide around the solution space. So when we flipped from vertical to horizontal, they were able to do it because. And that gets back to the idea that if, they were able to do it because they had explored the space in their practice and in their activities, they explored enough of the space of possible things that they could do, that they had experience with the shape of the solution options, with the subset of ways of solving this task versus that version of the task. Yeah. And it was kind of amazing to see. Just plonking the target, 5, 10, 15 meters away. Like it was remarkable. And when you looked at the simulation, like it's a hard task. The subset of solutions that actually work is very small, right? It's a very difficult thing to do. But they were able to slide around on it really, really well. And that's because they'd explored the various options and how that shape changes as the target location changes and all that sort of stuff. And
No, I think, and I think going back to what is good versus bad variability, I think your key point is that you need a theory, right? You need, as a coach, you still need some insight theory about what you think will make a movement. I guess I don't know if you could do it on an individual level of, okay, when this thrower varies their stride length when they throw, I don't think that. I think that people are trying that, but I don't think it really. You can pull out what the good variability and bad variability is on. Yeah, but you still need a conceptual understanding of it. Yeah,
you do. But I think the thing it does is it reorients the coach's attention to not the execution, but to the goal. And I think that's quite useful. So what you do is you set a goal and then allow the person to self-organize a solution to that goal. So because it's the goal that matters, the goal, the perceived affordance in this case, but the goal of the task is the thing that constrains the self-organization so that something comes out rather than nothing. And I think conceptually you could make the argument that if you really just kind of sit and kind of get to grips with the understanding of action that the uncontrolled manifold embodies, that understanding of action says that the thing that constrains the system is the goal. and everything else is up to the system to just self-organize its way through.
Yeah.
And so what you do is to create opportunities to explore the solutions to that, what you do, you give people variable goals, right? Set targets at different distances, and they're going to end up in different parts of the space. Make the target different orientations. They're going to have to do different things. Make the target move, right? I've exhausted my ability to animate my simulation. But one of the things I'd love to do is the fact that actually, like, I know what the affordance looks like for a target at 5 meters, and I know what it looks like for a target at 10 meters. And so there'll be a nice continuous change between 5 and 10 meters. And actually, as that changes, so one of the things you might have to wait if something's getting closer and closer to you, you might have to wait until you can perceive that it's within your ability to produce something that lives on the uncontrolled manifold, right? Yeah. That's something I'm quite interested in poking around, because as it gets further away from you, the options get more and more limited, and the release velocity required, the minimum release velocity might go past your ability to do it, right? Yeah. And so you can try and throw. But what do? You move to get close enough to throw.
Yeah.
And so on and so on and so on. There's lots of cool things there, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, Andrew. As the constraints get more demanding, the solution space is going to go, right? Yes. The things that are going to work to hit a target that's 10 meters away at 90 miles an hour is very low, right? You're going to get constrained. But yeah, I think that's, so I think, there's one other variable I think people pull out sometimes, index of synergy, right?
Yes.
Did you use that at all in yours?
Yeah, so I was looking at this. So the index of synergy, right? So what the uncontrolled manifold analysis gives you is effectively two numbers. It takes the variability in your data, and so you get a measure of the total variability, and then you get a number that's what proportion of that total is living within the uncontrolled manifold, and what proportion is off the manifold. And you have evidence that you've identified the right synergy and the right control structure if most of the variability is living on the uncontrolled manifold. So the way you do that is you construct this index of synergy. You take the good variability and divide it by the bad variability, basically. Yeah. Yeah. And you want that number to be more than 1. So if the number is 1, then the good and the bad variability are basically the same. And then if you let me think, what am I doing? Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways of doing it, but basically if the index of synergy comes out at 2, then that tells you that twice as much variability was living in the uncontrolled manifold part of the space versus the other thing. And that's evidence that you're decomposing that what you thought was being controlled and what you thought it was being controlled with respect to. That's evidence that you've picked the right things. But if you put in the wrong things, then you won't end up explaining the variance in that way, and it'll be more of a mess. And that's how you develop evidence for that.
And I know there's also versions that express it like as a ratio of the total variance, right? And
yes, that's right. You can do the difference between them as a proportion of the total.
And I think the general pattern you expect to find, right, is the total variance with practice, or if you compare skill levels, is probably going to go down. People do get overall more, and there's no denying that. Even in ecological psychology, we don't deny people get more consistent. But the more important part is the ratio of good to bad should go up, right? So that's the restructuring. That's
it. Because you're still, so the variability never goes to 0. That's the first thing. And so there's always some variability to cope with. And right. Skill comes from controlling yourself so that the majority of the variance lives within the uncontrolled manifold. And then from a scientist's point of view, if I get a great big whopping index of synergy, that tells me, A, there is a synergy present and that I've correctly identified the synergy. So I've picked the right limb variables. So that's a good start. And I've picked the right performance variable. I've picked the thing that the synergy is indeed trying to control. And so that's how you test the hypothesis, basically. So if you some of my numbers were higher than others, suggesting that some things were more important than others, for example. Yeah. And this was the thing that I finally kind of ran into, though, that was quite tricky. There's no strict guidelines on what counts as having shown that you've got evidence of a synergy. So, well, I have an index of synergy greater than 1. Yeah, but how much greater than 1? Is it like
1.1?
Like,
yeah.
So there was no kind of constraint on what constituted significantly greater than 1. And so I operationalized it in the paper. I did it in a certain way, but I tried to be very upfront about the fact that I just picked it because it picked that particular way of characterizing it because it seemed okay. But it was this is, again, it's not clear what counts as a good index of synergy yet. Like, more is better, but how much more is still up for grabs. And that's a complexity there for using analysis.
Yeah. And it really, there's quite a few papers that have used it, but it's still, relatively still under development, right? As a method. So I think this, kind of poking at it like you are is a good thing, right? Some people, get annoyed by it, when you poke at the methods, but
I love a good method, but a big chunk of me learning how to use it is to really take it for a spin. And so I ended up doing 2 things in this paper. I've got this hypothesis about affordances being the thing, and so I'm taking that idea for a spin using uncontrolled manifold. But I also ended up trying to take the uncontrolled manifold method for a bit of a spin and kick its tires, and come to grips with what it can and can't do, and some limitations on how it's getting used right now.
Yeah.
And there are some very strong constraints, but it was useful because I think I've identified some gaps. Not just, there's a problem, but it's a particularly shaped problem. It's like, actually, do you know what? I need effectivities in there, or I need information in there, or I need affordances in there. It's that's an affordance shaped hole.
Yeah.
I was getting some sense of that in the paper.
Yeah, I think I think what you're doing reminds me a lot of what Brett Fagan did with tau dot, right?
Yeah,
we can't just have information based control without understanding the affordances, right?
To be honest, this has been on my mind for a long time. I cite Brett's affordance-based control paper because I've been thinking about that stuff exactly for a long time. And I think, I think there's some really natural connections that have to be made there. But it's,
it's not easy. It's like connecting apples and oranges sometimes, right?
If anyone out there is really good at the maths,
yes.
One of my co-authors knows the maths and knows the method and all that sort of stuff. But if someone really good at the maths and likes taking this stuff for a real crazy spin, drop me an email. It's complicated.
It is very good. So, well, hopefully that helped give people a little bit of better understanding of what the uncontrolled manifold is. It's not an easy thing, but I think it's worthwhile going through the logic of it and trying to, if you don't go with, maybe not necessarily all the maths of it, it's not easy, but the logic of it. And I think it's worthwhile for everybody. I think it's a good conceptualization of repetition without repetition, for example. Yeah.
I tried really hard to write a clear version of this discussion in the introduction section of the paper. So I'll be really keen to get feedback on how well that's sticking, because I was really trying to walk through it as clearly as possible, in part to explain it to myself. But so interested readers should go have a look at the paper, and I'd love to hear how it's landing, actually, because it is part of what I'm trying to do. Is really, I think the concepts are fabulous. I think it comes from such a good place, such a good understanding of what movement and skill is. So it's cool. It's very exciting times.
Yeah. So it's available to anyone right now as a preprint, right? I'll put the link to it.
Yeah. So the preprint's publicly available on the Open Science Framework, and it's linked on. I'll send you the links.
And and thank you for coming on until we can think of another difficult thing to try to hash out. We're open to suggestions, right? We don't know all the answers, but always talking through it with you always helps me.
Thanks.
And I think people appreciate it. So thanks, Andrew.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including a monthly coaches meetup, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled. Gone straight away.